Captain Riley Martinez was having what you might generously call a bad day. And by bad day, I mean she was currently upside down inside the ship's coffee machine, surrounded by what appeared to be the mechanical equivalent of spaghetti, while cursing in 3 languages she'd picked up during her engineering training. The espresso maker aboard the research vessel Caffeinated Chaos had decided to stage a rebellion, and Riley was not having it. "Come on, you caffeinated piece of junk," she muttered, wielding her wrench like a surgeon's scalpel. "I know you're just being dramatic." That's when the emergency klaxon started blaring, which was never a good sign on a Tuesday. Or any day, really. Captain Martinez, to the bridge came the voice of Janet, the ship's AI, who somehow managed to sound both urgent and incredibly bored at the same time. "We have received a priority transmission from the Galactic Council." Riley extracted herself from the coffee machine's innards, wiping grease from her hands onto her already stained coveralls. "Can it wait? I'm in the middle of preventing a caffeine-related mutiny." "I'm afraid not, Captain. The transmission is marked as existentially critical." Riley sighed. In her experience, whenever aliens used words like existentially critical, it usually meant someone somewhere had made a spectacularly bad decision, and humans were about to pay for it. She trudged to the bridge, where Admiral Pompous McBluebottom's holographic form was waiting. The Admiral was a Zephyrian, which meant he looked like someone had crossed a peacock with a motivational speaker, and given the result delusions of grandeur. His feathers were literally ruffled, which was never a good sign. "Greetings, human representative," the Admiral began, his voice dripping with the kind of condescension usually reserved for explaining simple concepts to particularly slow children. "I bring urgent news from the Galactic Council." "Let me guess," Riley said, settling into her captain's chair with all the enthusiasm of someone attending their own root canal. "Someone's declared war on someone else and you need humans to clean up the mess." "Worse," Admiral McBluebottom announced dramatically. "The Vorthak Empire has issued a challenge of single combat to your species." Riley blinked. "The who now?" "The Vorthak," the Admiral repeated, his feathers practically vibrating with nervous energy. "They are the apex predators of the galaxy. 8 feet tall, claws like vibroblades, teeth that can chew through starship hull plating. They've never lost a single combat challenge in 10,000 years. "Okay," Riley said slowly. "And they want to fight humans because?" "Apparently your species was described to them as persistent vermin who won't stay dead when they're supposed to. They took this as a challenge to their reputation." Riley rubbed her temples. "Who exactly described us that way?" The Admiral's feathers drooped slightly. "That would be me. During last week's cultural exchange dinner. I may have had too much fermented plum wine." "Fantastic." Riley leaned back in her chair. "So let me get this straight. You got drunk and accidentally challenged the galaxy's most dangerous predators to a fight with humanity." "The challenge has been formally accepted by the Council," the Admiral continued quickly. "If humanity refuses to send a champion, the Vorthak will consider it an admission of cowardice and will glass your home planet. And I'm hearing about this because—" "Well," the Admiral said, suddenly finding his talons very interesting to look at, "the Council needs you to send your finest warrior immediately. The combat is scheduled for 3 days from now." Riley stared at him. "Admiral, I hate to break this to you, but I'm a maintenance engineer. I fix things. Specifically, I fix things that other people break. I don't actually break things myself. Well, not on purpose." The transmission request was quite specific, the Admiral insisted. Quote, "Send whoever is available right now to represent humanity in single combat against our greatest champion." The Council assumed this was human confidence speaking. "That wasn't confidence," Riley said flatly. "That was probably autocorrect." But it was too late. The challenge had been issued, accepted, and broadcast across 17 star systems. Backing down now would not only result in Earth becoming a very large, very hot piece of charcoal, but would also completely humiliate humanity in front of every species in the galaxy. Riley looked at her wrench, then at the Admiral's expectant expression, then back at her wrench. "Well," she said finally, "this is going to be interesting." "Janet," Riley called out as she paced around the ship's small training room, "remind me again why I thought this was a good idea." "You didn't," Janet replied cheerfully. "Your exact words were, and I quote, 'Well, we're all going to die anyway. Might as well die spectacularly.'" "Right. Thanks for that morale boost." Riley gestured at the holo simulator, which was currently projecting what appeared to be a rubber duck wearing armor. "And why exactly is the combat training program spawning bath toys?" "The ship's computer seems to be experiencing some difficulties differentiating between combat training and crew relaxation protocols," Janet explained. "I've been meaning to mention that the maintenance logs show 17 critical errors in the holographic systems." Riley stared at the rubber duck, which was now somehow wielding a tiny sword. "You've been meaning to mention this?" "I prioritize based on immediate threat to crew survival. Until 3 days ago, your biggest concern was whether the coffee machine would achieve sentience and demand workers' rights." "Fair point." Riley picked up her wrench and attempted what she thought might be a combat stance. The rubber duck squeaked at her menacingly. "So just to clarify our situation here, I have approximately 60 hours to transform from someone who considers successfully assembling IKEA furniture a major victory into someone capable of defeating a legendary alien warrior." "That appears to be an accurate assessment of your predicament, yes." Riley had spent the first day trying to access the ship's database on Vorthak combat techniques, which turned out to be remarkably unhelpful. Apparently, their fighting style could be summarized as be bigger, stronger, and more vicious than your opponent. The tactical analysis basically amounted to Step 1, try not to die immediately. Step 2, there is no Step 2. The cultural files were even less encouraging. The Vorthak had never lost a single combat challenge because they were, quite literally, the biggest and nastiest things in their corner of the galaxy. Their current champion, Grimfang the Bone-Crusher, had a perfect record of 847 victories. His biography read like a catalog of violence, with footnotes about his interior decorating preferences leaning heavily towards skull motifs. "Janet, what do the files say about Grimfang's fighting style?" "Brutal, efficient, and remarkably uncreative," Janet replied. "He typically defeats opponents within the first 30 seconds through a combination of overwhelming physical superiority and intimidation. His longest fight lasted 2 minutes and 14 seconds, and that was only because his opponent was particularly good at running away." Riley flopped down on the floor next to the still squeaking rubber duck. "Great. So I'm going up against someone who treats Galaxy-class warriors like appetizers." On the bright side, Janet offered, the Vorthak Combat Arena does have excellent medical facilities. "For treating my remains? Or for identifying them, really?" Riley spent the second day trying to think of any possible advantages she might have. She wasn't stronger than Grimfang. She wasn't faster. She definitely wasn't more intimidating. Her only real skill was fixing things that were broken, usually by hitting them with tools until they worked properly again. "Janet, do we have any information about Vorthak weaknesses?" "Surprisingly, yes. According to the xenobiology reports, they have several notable vulnerabilities. They're extremely susceptible to psychological warfare, having never developed resistance to mockery or sarcasm. Their rigid honor code makes them predictable in combat situations. And most interestingly, they've never faced an opponent who didn't take them seriously." Riley sat up. "What do you mean?" "Every species they fought has approached the combat with appropriate fear and respect for Vorthak prowess. Their entire fighting style is built around opponents who are already half defeated by intimidation before the fight begins." For the first time in 2 days, Riley smiled. It wasn't a particularly nice smile. "Janet, I think I might have an idea." "Does it involve hitting things with wrenches?" "It involves hitting things with wrenches." The Vorthak homeworld looked exactly like what you'd expect from a species whose idea of architectural beauty involves skulls, spikes, and ominous red lighting. Riley's shuttle descended through an atmosphere that seemed to be comprised entirely of doom and foreboding, landing in what the locals generously called a spaceport, but which more accurately resembled a crater with parking meters. The welcoming committee consisted of 12 Vorthak warriors who looked like they'd been carved from granite by someone with serious anger issues. Their leader, Warlord Snarl, stepped forward. He was easily 8.5 feet tall, covered in scars that suggested he'd survived encounters with things that probably should have killed him. And he had more teeth than any reasonable creature ought to possess. "Human," he growled, his voice like rocks falling down a mountain, "you are smaller than expected." Riley looked up at him, adjusted her ponytail, and said, "Yeah, well, you're exactly as compensating for something as I expected." The silence that followed was the kind of silence that usually precedes either violence or profound confusion. In this case, it was both. "Did the human just?" one of the warriors whispered. "I think it insulted Warlord Snarl," another replied. Warlord Snarl himself seemed to be experiencing some kind of cognitive malfunction. His mouth opened and closed several times, but no sounds emerged. Riley was pretty sure this was the first time in his adult life that anyone had talked back to him. Anyway, Riley continued cheerfully, slinging her toolkit over her shoulder. "Where's this arena I keep hearing about? I've got a coffee machine to get back to." The arena was, Riley had to admit, pretty impressive in a design by someone with a serious obsession with death and violence kind of way. Carved directly into a mountain, it could hold roughly 50,000 spectators, all of whom were currently howling for blood, preferably hers. The floor of the arena was covered in sand that had been stained an ominous dark color by what Riley really hoped was just rusty water. Weapon racks lined the walls, filled with swords, axes, and various implements that looked like they'd been designed by someone who'd read a description of medieval torture devices and thought, "But what if we made them bigger?" And there, in the center of it all, stood Grimfang the Bone-Crusher. If Warlord Snarl looked like he'd been carved from granite, Grimfang looked like he'd been carved from a mountain. He was easily 9 feet tall, built like a tank that had been crossed with a nightmare, and decorated with what appeared to be the bones of every opponent he'd ever defeated. His claws were the size of kitchen knives, his teeth could probably open cans, and his eyes glowed with the kind of malevolent intelligence that suggested he didn't just enjoy killing things, he was really, really good at it. He saw Riley enter the arena and threw back his head, releasing a roar that shook dust from the ceiling and made several spectators in the front row involuntarily step backward. Riley tightened her ponytail, looked up at this monument to violence and death, and asked, "That all you've got?" The arena went dead silent. What happened next could generously be described as a fight, if you were the kind of person who considered a freight train colliding with a bicycle to be a competitive race. Grimfang launched himself across the arena with the kind of speed that really shouldn't have been possible for something his size, claws extended, roaring like a jet engine having a tantrum. Riley's response was to dive sideways, roll behind a conveniently placed chunk of decorative rubble, and shout, "Wow, subtle approach there, big guy. Do you also announce yourself when you use the bathroom?" This was apparently not the traditional response to a Vorthak death charge. Grimfang skidded to a halt, confused. In his 847 previous victories, opponents had typically responded to his opening move by either screaming in terror, attempting to block with weapons that immediately shattered, or simply fainting. None of them had ever hidden behind rocks and made jokes about his bathroom habits. "Human," he bellowed, his voice carrying across the arena, "face me with honor." "I am facing you," Riley called back, popping her head up from behind the rubble. "I'm just facing you from over here, where your claws are not currently occupying the same space as my internal organs." The crowd was beginning to murmur. This wasn't how Vorthak combat was supposed to work. There were rules, traditions. The champion charged, the opponent either blocked or dodged unsuccessfully, and then the champion won quickly and efficiently. There was usually much more screaming and significantly less commentary on bathroom etiquette. Grimfang tried again, this time attempting to circle around Riley's improvised cover. Unfortunately for him, Riley had spent years crawling around the guts of starships, and she knew how to use confined spaces to her advantage. As he rounded the corner, she was already gone, having somehow squeezed through a gap between two boulders that shouldn't have been large enough for a human. You know, Riley's voice echoed from somewhere in the arena. For someone called the Bone-Crusher, you're not actually crushing very many bones right now. Is this performance anxiety? Because I hear there are medications for that. That did it. Grimfang abandoned all pretense of strategy and simply started smashing everything in sight, trying to flush Riley out of whatever hiding spot she'd found. Chunks of stone flew in all directions. Ancient weapon racks exploded into splinters. The carefully maintained arena floor developed several new craters. Riley waited until he'd worked himself into a proper frenzy, then stepped out from behind a pillar directly behind him and smacked him in the back of the knee with her wrench. The sound that followed was the sound of 50,000 Vorthak spectators collectively gasping in disbelief. Grimfang stumbled, spun around, and stared at Riley with an expression that suggested his entire worldview was currently undergoing emergency reconstruction. Did you just, he started. Hit you with a wrench? Yes. Did it hurt? Apparently. Are you going to do something about it? Or should I schedule this for next Tuesday when you're feeling more up to it? For the first time in his adult life, Grimfang the Bone-Crusher was experiencing what humans call doubt. Riley had made a crucial discovery during those first few minutes of not dying. Grimfang was really good at fighting things that fought back in predictable ways. Unfortunately for him, Riley had never read the manual on how to be a proper opponent. The thing is, Riley said conversationally, dodging another swipe of claws that carved gouges in the stone wall, you guys have been doing this the same way for 10,000 years. That's got to get boring. She rolled under his next attack and came up behind him again, this time managing to hook her wrench around his ankle and pull. Grimfang, who had been putting his full weight into what should have been a devastating downward strike, found himself suddenly off balance and crashed face first into the arena floor. The crowd's murmurs were getting louder and more confused. Let me paint you a picture here, folks, Riley announced, addressing the audience like she was hosting a nature documentary. What we're observing is a classic example of overpredation leading to evolutionary stagnation. The Vorthak have been so successful for so long that they've forgotten how to adapt. Grimfang scrambled to his feet, sand and stone dust covering his elaborate bone decorations. You dare mock the Vorthak way of war? Oh, I'm not mocking it, Riley said, dodging another charge by simply stepping aside at the last possible second. I'm providing constructive criticism. See, the problem with your approach is that it relies entirely on your opponents being afraid of you. She gestured with her wrench as Grimfang sailed past her and crashed into another wall. But here's the thing about humans: we're really bad at being appropriately afraid of things that should terrify us. We see a predator that's evolved to be the perfect killing machine, and our first thought isn't run away. It's I wonder if I can fix that. This was when Riley discovered something interesting about Vorthak psychology. Grimfang wasn't just confused by her tactics, he was becoming genuinely upset. His roars were taking on a distinctly whiny quality, like a toddler who'd been told he couldn't have ice cream for dinner. Stand still and fight, he demanded. Why would I do that? Riley asked reasonably. That would be stupid. And while humans are famous for being stupid, we're usually stupid in more creative ways. She started using the arena's elaborate death trap features against him. When he charged toward her across a section of floor designed to collapse under weight, she simply stepped aside and let physics do the work. When he tried to corner her near a wall lined with retractable spikes, she triggered the mechanism and sent him diving for cover. The fascinating thing, Riley continued her impromptu lecture, is that your entire species has apparently never encountered an opponent who treats this like a problem-solving exercise instead of a dominance display. Grimfang was now breathing heavily, his perfect bone jewelry scattered across the arena floor, his claws dulled from hitting stone instead of flesh. For the first time in his career, he was facing an opponent who wasn't playing by the rules. And the crowd was starting to cheer. Not for Grimfang. For Riley. The end came, as most ends do, rather suddenly and with considerably less drama than anyone had been expecting. Grimfang, now thoroughly frustrated and operating on pure instinct rather than any kind of strategy, made one final, desperate charge across the arena. It was a magnificent charge, really the kind of full commitment, death or glory attack that had served him well for hundreds of previous victories. Riley watched him approach, calculated angles and momentum with the same precision she used for installing new hydraulic systems, and at the last possible second, she stepped aside while simultaneously extending her wrench at exactly the right height to catch his ankles. Physics took over from there. Grimfang went down like a felled tree, his own momentum carrying him into a spectacular tumble that ended with him flat on his back, then staring up at the arena ceiling while trying to remember how breathing worked. Riley walked over calmly, knelt down next to him, and gently pressed the business end of her wrench against his throat. "Do you yield?" she asked politely. The arena held its breath. 50,000 Vorthak spectators waited to see what would happen next. Grimfang looked up at this small, grease-stained human who had just done something that no warrior in galactic history had ever managed to accomplish. He looked at her calm expression, her practical coveralls, her tool belt, and her absolutely unimpressed demeanor. "I yield," he said quietly. For a moment, nobody moved. Then, from somewhere in the crowd came the sound of a single Vorthak slowly clapping. Then another. Then another. Within seconds, the entire arena was on its feet, cheering for the small human engineer who had just accomplished the impossible by treating it like a particularly annoying repair job. Warlord Snarl descended to the arena floor, his expression mixing bewilderment with what might have been respect. "Human Riley Martinez," he announced formally, "you have defeated our greatest champion in honorable combat. By the ancient laws of the Vorthak, your species has earned our eternal respect and friendship." "Does that come with dental?" Riley asked. "It comes with a lifetime supply of fermented fish and an invitation to our annual skull polishing festival." Riley considered this. "Can I get back to you on that?" 2 hours later, Riley was back aboard the Caffeinated Chaos, finally finishing the repair job on the coffee machine, while Admiral McBluebottom's hologram flickered nearby, trying to process what had just happened. "So let me understand this correctly," the Admiral said slowly. "You defeated the galaxy's most feared warrior species by treating their ultimate champion like a malfunctioning piece of equipment." "Pretty much, yeah." Riley tightened the last bolt and stepped back to admire her handiwork. "The thing about predators is that they're usually specialists. Really, really good at one specific thing. But humans? We're generalists. We adapt, we improvise, we make do. And now the Vorthak Empire wants to be humanity's best friend. Apparently so. Though I should probably mention that Grimfang asked if he could come visit Earth sometime. He's apparently never met anyone who wasn't afraid of him, and he finds the experience refreshingly novel." The coffee machine hummed to life, producing what smelled like actual coffee instead of the industrial solvent it had been dispensing for the past week. "I've already sent a message to Earth requesting that they send an actual diplomat to handle the formal treaty negotiations," Riley continued. "Because I have a feeling that hit it with a wrench until it works probably isn't appropriate for interspecies relations." "Probably not," the Admiral agreed faintly. Riley poured herself a cup of properly functioning coffee and took a sip. It was perfect. "You know what the funny thing is?" she said. "I didn't actually defeat Grimfang because I'm some kind of secret warrior. I defeated him because he'd never fought anyone who treated him like a puzzle to be solved instead of a monster to be feared. And that really was the most human thing of all."